I'll start by introducing myself, even though that is technically a slide in the PowerPoint. But I am Alexander Pereira. I am the patient technology specialist here at Methodist Children's in San Antonio, Texas. I've been down here since January 2018, so I'm headed into the end of year 4 of running this program. And we officially just got our hands on a second patient tech specialist. So our program is now a 2-person program, which is very exciting. And my background is I have a master's in education tech with a focus on games and education, and about 10 years working in after-school programs, summer camps, things like that in both the U.S. and Canada for municipal programs as well as private programs. And we'll let Adam introduce himself.
And the slides are here. Welcome, everybody, to Games for Socialization. Alexander has already introduced himself, which is this slide. My name is Adam Davis. I am a co-founder and co-executive director of the nonprofit organization Game to Grow. We're a 501c3 nonprofit organization, and we are most well known for our therapeutic social skills groups using games of all kinds, but especially tabletop role-playing games like Dungeons and Dragons. I have been a professional game master for more than a decade now. I'm also a co-developer and one of the trainers in the Game to Grow method of therapeutically applied role-playing games at Game to Grow. So we're talking today a whole lot about the use of tabletop role-playing games and the way that they have been used for socialization in San Antonio.
And so real quick, before we dig too deep into the D&D, which will be the majority of this panel, I wanted to touch on some of the other stuff we're using for games as socialization in the hospital. So this is going to happen, unfortunately, so give me 1 second.
This is a great notice for some of the things we're going to talk about later in terms of the challenges along the way as we've learned in this process.
So pre-COVID, Games for Socialization included getting patients into the playrooms together, special events such as, game days or just other kind of events. And I included sibling visits, so having the siblings of the patients in the room was a method of socialization. When we'd go in and play games, we'd set up everything and, grab as many people who wanted to play with us. In the post-COVID times, and honestly, we probably should have done it even before COVID, we do Game Time, which is a LAN party in the hospital. 9 times out of 10, we use Minecraft. Well, 10 times out of 10 so far, because it's cross-play on literally every device, and it's super expandable, super flexible. But you do still need PSN or Xbox Live, depending on how your setup is. We work with a charity called Acquaint VR, which does these really cool VR 360 photo tours and has a volunteer call in as a tour guide and kind of gives them somebody else to talk to. Now that it is largely just a parent involved, I do my best to pull parents in when we do interventions of like, hey, you can play too. I have equipment for that. Most parents want to go get coffee instead, which is fair. We have a virtual volunteer program. So for a while, I had volunteers calling in and playing Game Time with our kiddos, and I could leave that equipment, and we were using a bunch of hospital accounts friended to each other. So volunteers could sign into a hospital account, so no personal accounts were being there, as well as we have volunteers who come around on our robot or on an iPad and do art projects, sing music, all kinds of stuff like that. And then we work with another charity for Camp Braveheart, which is a virtual hospital summer camp. It was originally an in-hospital summer camp, but has now changed for kind of obvious reasons. And they do all kinds of things. Again, art, again, musicians coming around, providing crafts, all that kind of stuff.
So one of the emerging needs we've been talking about as COVID has hit is that a lot of these opportunities are no longer available to a lot of the youth that we, Alexander would normally be serving. So what has been happening is Game to Grow has come in and have been running virtual tabletop role-playing game sessions. But before we talk about the impact and the work that we've done using tabletop role-playing games, really quickly in the chat, if you could give me a number between 0 and 5 for your familiarity with tabletop role-playing games like Dungeons and Dragons. Give me a 5 if you have been playing tabletop role-playing games for years, you're very familiar with them, and give me a 0 if you don't know what I'm talking about when I say tabletop role-playing games. Are Awesome. I see some 5s and some 1s and some 0s, 4s. All right, all around the spectrum. That is great. So what we're going to talk about next, before we can move on, is what exactly is a tabletop role-playing game? What do I mean when I'm talking about this? So the best way to understand what a tabletop role-playing game is also to talk about what it is not. And when I say tabletop, it's still an important part of the definition of this game, even though it's happening virtually. But historically, tabletop role-playing games took place around a table. They were an in-person game, not a video game, a really important distinction when talking about these types of games. But important to note that tabletop role-playing games are also cooperative. The players are working together. They're actually collaborating to not just have some sort of win condition that the game rules determine, but actually the point of the experience is to tell a story where the players are playing characters and they get to decide what their characters do as the game moves forward. There are rules in place, so it's not just a sort of collaborative storytelling activity. There is a formal set of rules and guidelines. You might be familiar with Dungeons and Dragons, which is one of the more complicated games. There are a whole spectrum of different challenge levels and different complexity levels, different themes, story types that happen in tabletop role-playing games. One of the most interesting aspects of this kind of collaborative role-playing story game of chance is that there is a particular person involved called a game master. This is distinctly different from any other kind of board game, card game, etc. Is that there's a game master who's a person who is sort of facilitating the experience. And the way that the structure of the game works is that in the story of the game master describes a situation that the characters would find themselves in. So each player has a character sheet, and on that character sheet is that character's strengths, abilities, sometimes challenges, the things they're good at, the things they're bad at, sometimes the history, where their character came from, their likes and dislikes, etc. So every player with their character is in a traditional setting, sitting around a table where someone is a game master. The game master describes the situation that those characters are in. Oftentimes that is something where there is an object or an outcome that those characters desire, and there's something in the way. So an example of this might be that characters are trying to quest for treasure, but between them and that X on the treasure is a bridge, a rickety bridge that is swaying in the wind, and the game master would describe this rickety bridge and then ask players, what do you do to get across this rickety bridge? The players would listen to the description from the game master. They would ask questions. Maybe they would wonder to get more information about the bridge, maybe about their character's skills or abilities. Then they would decide what their character would do and tell the game master. They would ideally work together, collaborating on how to overcome that obstacle, but they are just deciding and determining what their character does. The game master listens to that description and then determines if there's any randomizing agents like dice or other types of games use other kinds of randomizing agents. A lot of games use 7 multi-polyhedron dice, D4s, D6s, D8s, D10s, D12s, and then the players would roll those dice, and then the game master would determine, based on those rolls, whether there is a success or a not success, or the spectrum between success and failure, and then the storyline moves forward as the characters played by their players make decisions and attempts to overcome obstacles. What happens is, as the cycle of play continues, a story is told, full of trials and tribulations and successes along the way. So we've been doing this remotely. So historically, these games were played sitting around a table. We can all picture sort of the old basement that a lot of these games were played in. And because of COVID, and because Game to Grow is based in the Seattle area and Alexander is based in San Antonio, we were doing all of this remotely, web conferencing in with WebEx. So there was a way that we were able to respond in the COVID era, where the youth aren't really able to go interact in person, and now we can actually teleconference in and provide a group tabletop role-playing game experience, where in this particular context, it was myself and the other Game to Grow executive director, Adam Johns, who were teleconferencing in with the youth that Alexander had chosen.
So part of that is we're going to kind of go over the process of what this looks like, because this isn't as simple as your normal game group getting together on a Tuesday and hanging out and playing D&D. Now, there's nothing about that is ever simple. If anybody's run D&D, it is herding cats but then you multiply that by hospital, and it becomes a whole different story. So we work to recruit. I run around and recruit participants for the game. This is patients that are recommended to me either from child life specialists or by my own knowledge of patients I've worked with who I think would be interested and be willing to try this. That includes selling the game, explaining what it is, all these kinds of things. And then I also provide all the patients get physical dice, because there's something way more fun about physical dice, as well as character sheets and and photo consents and all of the stuff required to kind of get the HIPAA stuff out of the way. And usually that's done at the last second because it's a hospital, so things change on who's here and who's not. And then we start the game and hand it back over to Adam.
So when we when Adam Johns and I would show up to run these games, it was the two of us running it. Adam Johns for our pilot program was the game master, and I served as a model student. So I was there also participating. I was there playing a character. The nuances of that were complicated, and we'll talk about that in the next slide. But when the two of us would show up, we would be game mastering, or Adam Johns would be game master. We'd be co-facilitating that group for a 90-minute session. We had scheduled it out where initially we were running games whenever we could, and then eventually we realized that we needed to schedule them on a calendar so that Alexander could have some time to prepare and get the youth prepared for that experience as well. But ultimately, in that 90-minute session, we were teaching the game, introducing the game, running the game, and processing the game all in that 90-minute session. And because we weren't entirely sure week to week which youth were showing up, which had been there before, and which were coming for the first time, our storylines took the form sort of like a Power Rangers kind of plot. There's a big bad evil villain, think Rita Repulsa. There is a helper character, think Zordon. Maybe I'm aging myself in talking about Power Rangers from the early 90s, but that sort of story structure was really useful for us, because if a participant had engaged in the story before, they could have some familiar contact points in the story. The same helper character was cultivating the group of heroes and sending them on a mission. See, this evil wizard Malvex had dispersed all of these magical chaos items around the world, and that our watcher person, our Zordon type character, cultivated the heroes and sent them to resolve these and collect these chaos items and bring them back for safekeeping. So as we would do this over the course of the 10 sessions or so that we ran this pilot, we learned a lot.
So talking on the challenges, I mentioned a few of them. And one of the biggest ones is, actually, I don't think we even put it on the slide, but is selling this game to patients. So San Antonio is not as terribly nerdy as Seattle, where I grew up. If I walk into a room and go, do you know what D&D is? You get more zeros than you get anything else. Like more kids not knowing anything, more kids not being able to have the answer to that. And so Adam gave a wonderful explanation of it that no child would understand. But not no child, but most of our patients would not understand and would not be like, yes, that sounds fun. So we have to sell it. We run into problems with, obviously, HIPAA. Even though all the disclosures have been signed, a nurse can still walk in, a doctor can still walk in and start talking about sensitive medical subjects. iPads are surprisingly terrible microphones, except when they pick up everything else in a room. Patients have a hard time hearing each other, hospital internet, things like that. Patients get confused about dice. Dice, if I tell you to pick up the 20-sided die and you've never seen a polyhedral D12 or D20, it is confusing. As well as just getting the right kiddos, getting the right buy-in from staff, so that people actually know what this is, so that they can give me kids that are appropriate. And then I think the rest of these are yours.
The other side of things that was a plus here, and so this challenge was mediated, was the fact that I've known Alexander for such a long time. I have his number in my phone, and if there was an issue and we were having any sort of tech issue, or there was a youth that was having a challenge, and I needed to be able to communicate that with Alexander, because Alexander was on these calls. But the life of someone in Alexander's position is he was called around and needed to leave and respond to things. So there were times that he was present and paying attention, and times that he was taking care of other patients, et cetera. So luckily, the communication that we had with him was pretty seamless, because I could text him, shorthand without, and he knows me and I know him, so we can communicate pretty efficiently that way. But this was a thing that we were thinking about, what challenges would exist as we were expanding this. Well, that communication process is important, because as issues might show up for those youth, they might need help, dice fall on the floor, et cetera. Alexander can be summoned to go remedy those situations. The other challenge is that we were navigating whichever youth Alexander was able to recruit for that day. And so oftentimes that would mean we would have youth of varying capacity to participate, and varying age, and varying understanding of the game systems. And so what happened ultimately was the game system we were playing was Critical Core, which is one that Game to Grow built, and it is a rules light system. But even then, we were navigating the complexities of the situation, where that game system was probably still more complex than was necessary. And Adam Johns, as a game master, is an absolute pro, and he was navigating when to apply the rules as written, when to mediate the rules, and he literally wrote those rules. And so he's really got that sort of adept responding to the varying needs. And my role as the model student was often to keep the process moving. What a lot of the youth had access to was participating with participants, their fellow children, but also without the performance anxiety of having to run everything. The game master can't move the story forward without player input. So having that the model student was really useful when the patients were needing to have some care, or were not feeling up to speaking. They were still able to participate, because their characters could still be part of the story, even when the model student was kind of guiding the process and stepping forward when the story needed it, and stepping back appropriately. And that sort of simpatico with the game master was really essential. But all of this is happening in 90 minutes. So in that process, we've got to get the tech set up. We've got to introduce the game, the concepts of the game, launch the story, hook the players into the narrative, run the game, have ideally enough of a story arc where the players have a triumph at the end of it. They feel successful. And on the stories we were running, the evil wizard Melvex had put a magic spoon out into the world that was making food come to life. And the players had to fight carrots that had come to life and kidnapped a powerful chef on a very important day of cooking for a royal meal. And the players had to go save the chef, and then all the food had been destroyed, and so they had to help cook this royal meal to bring the whole continent together in peace, love, and harmony. And all of that has to happen in 90 minutes. And then in the Game to Grow method, we have a check-in process and a checkout process. It's a really important container to build for the experience. And we were still doing that also in those 90 minutes. So there is a real need there for that game master to be super flexible and be able to respond to the emerging needs, especially as Alexander was saying, the youth are sometimes having to be muted in those moments, because there's a nurse that comes in and has to provide some care. So it is a very much not your typical Dungeons and Dragons game. Like Alexander was saying earlier, there is a whole lot of pausing and shifting attention and moving things forward that we couldn't have anticipated before we got started on this pilot. So it was a really useful framework for us as we're Alexander, any other challenges you want to share?
Yeah, I guess we'll touch on the next, while you slide the slide over, of there is no major fantasy property that is in the cultural consciousness anymore. Lord of the Rings was 20 plus years ago, which hurts to say, but was about 20 years. So it's actually very hard to be like, yes, we're going to use this fantasy setting with elves, and kids are like, you lost me.
Overhead test pages.
Apparently they're doing overhead test pages. So even just selling them on the world has been an interesting problem, and one that we're working on modifying. But that's been the other weird thing we didn't expect.
And Alexander's recruitment tool was translating all of our critical core characters into Marvel superheroes, for example. So our orc barbarian is like the Hulk. Our human ranger or human fighter with a bow is basically it's Hawkeye. So that was a really useful translation, and the next steps is we're going to explore some superhero games as a way to potentially translate that as well. So over the course of these sessions, we've been running some pretty powerful experiences for these youth.
Yeah. So these are 2 screenshots from recorded sessions that we have. And even in these screenshots, it's really cool. You can see, though, lighting and tops of heads and all kinds of stuff like that. But these are games that we've had patients very genuinely interacting with each other, patients who you wouldn't have, who would even when we had the playrooms open, would not have hung out and enjoyed spending time with each other. I believe it's in the upper left picture. We had the kiddo on the upper right corner had been largely disengaged. He'd been in the hospital for a week or something like that, and had been just very quiet, wouldn't talk, wouldn't really interact with people. And we were lucky enough to have the specialist on that floor sit in with him, sit in with the session and kind of watch the whole session. And when the session wrapped up, the specialist basically said, "This is the most I've seen him engaged in the whole time he's been here. It's almost a completely different kiddo. This is the most I've seen him smile." Things like that. And that's what we're going for. Our real goal in terms of patient outcomes here is we want very positive patient feedback, specifically about the event. Every so often we have patients who are very excited that just Alexander was awesome and brought something by, which is great for me, but doesn't exactly help us with the, knowing if the event itself was what we wanted. But we have patients who ask "Oh, is this happening tomorrow? Is this happening next? When is this happening? Oh, it's not happening this week. This is the only one we had time for this month. Oh, okay. Very sad. Even patients who are disappointed that they have to leave. We've had a couple patients who leave mid-game, which is a fairly unique challenge. And they're like, "Can I stay? Can I have 30 more minutes in the hospital before and that's always the best thing to hear from it means we're doing our jobs right. It means that this is something that they're genuinely invested in and super excited about. I'm going to take control, Adam, so I can keep clicking through. So we have every time we wrap up one of these games, we have patients ideally fill out a little, did you have fun? Did you enjoy it? What's something you remember? Kind of thing. And so this is from one of our patients in those photos who the mom was, thank you so much. My son has been smiling and happy since halfway through the game. The program with games has helped take his mind off being here. Please continue this. I was amazed how well it worked. And so I make sure that we try to get parent feedback and not just kid feedback, because our patient feedback is usually, that was awesome. But parent feedback tends to be pretty detailed. They talk about how patients have had a very hard time. They'll talk about specific diagnoses, all kinds of stuff like that. That is just how meaningful this game was to them. Speaking of specific diagnosis, we had this patient whose mom wrote that he's shy around his peers. He has high functioning autism, but is very awkward. Has been here 9 days. Has been having a genuinely not a good time in the hospital. But seeing him interact, seeing him smile, seeing him made the mom's day too. It made his day. He had the most fun with this. I think he still had the most fun with this out of all the kiddos we've done. But the mom was effusive in her praise. And I was like, please write this down. And she just starts writing an essay, which is so exciting for us to see. Weirdly, the ones we all have, but the other thing is when I go and I chat with the kiddos, they don't tend to write down their responses, but they talk about how much fun it was. Or I see them the next day and they talk about, do you remember that time that I came up with the idea of spaghetti tacos? And then like I helped make spaghetti tacos for the big ball that we were providing food for. Or they're like, do you remember that time when I got stuck? And I've had to step in and like play a kid, like a patient's character when they've left. And it's funny because they'll be like, do you remember that time when we got stuck and you decided to like dive head first into the mashed potato monster? And I'm like, yes, I do. Like, that was a lot of fun. You'll get stories, which is what good tabletop RPGs. I use D&D as a shorthand. We're not actually playing Dungeons and Dragons, the system. But it's what good tabletop role playing is all about, is having those stories and moving on. Having a parent talk about how like it was the excitement in this patient's eyes was, you know, so cool. Kiddos wanting to do it again. I had one random pair of dice that didn't match with all the other dice I had. And so like a kiddo got to take those home, and watching that kiddo just light up of like, I get to take these dice. And I was like, yeah, because they don't fit in all my setup. And the kiddo's like, oh my, this is amazing. Or kiddos who, can you tell me how to find a game group at home? All kinds of stuff like that. This is an example of our patient feedback. It was creative. I really liked it. I'd do it again. Fair enough. Like, that's awesome. That is direct patient feedback. It's not quite an essay, but that's fair. They're not supposed to.
And one of the things that was so useful about the way that we were bringing tabletop role playing games was that the kids were not only being able to have fun with a game, because there are lots of opportunities for kids to play games and get the life enriching magic of games. What was so great about this was a lot of these youth were socially isolated in their bed, and because, like Alexander was saying earlier, there aren't access to social interaction for them. One of the most beautiful things was to see the parents responding to how their kids were able to actually play with other peers, and that youth saying, remember when we is such a beautiful story. That's a collective story for youth that otherwise are oftentimes stuck in a hospital bed, but now they have a collective story. So there's a lot of potential we can take the success of this pilot program we've been running with San Antonio to some really interesting outcomes, some really exciting things we plan to do with this. We've been talking with Alexander about cultivating a volunteer network where Game to Grow cultivates and trains and recruits and vets background checks to the appropriate amount, whatever game masters might be able to provide a continuing and ongoing services through tabletop role-playing games. And someone in Alexander's position would then be able to connect with Game to Grow and calendar some events, do the recruiting that Alexander had talked about, streamline that process, and then really build that system out where then they show up on WebEx and the game master we provide runs the game and debriefs with the patient tech specialist. That is one option we've talked about, where Game to Grow takes on the roles and responsibilities of training and cultivating those volunteers, so that the hospital doesn't have to do very much besides running around and cultivate and get the kids excited about it. Although Game to Grow is working on a video that'll teach how to play a game, to sort of a recruitment tool as well, a short 2-minute video. It could be propped up on an iPad. The other option we've been talking about is also staff run groups. Some patient tech specialists have the ability and the capacity to actually run the games themselves. And so we've been discussing training patient tech specialists to run the games themselves. But because we've learned a whole lot about this process, and Adam Johns, who is just about the best therapeutic game master on earth, it was a challenge for us even to launch this program. So we would want to make sure that we weren't just training and then sending patient tech specialists off to run the groups. We would want to actually be in a support relationship with the patient tech specialist to provide consultation, provide ongoing support, provide modules and storylines, and to build some structure there that would allow that patient tech specialist to not have to do as much homework before the game starts, but would be able to have some of those tools and supports to do the best they could to help those kids connect with each other. So we're building these systems out. This is brand new, cutting edge. In this partnership between Game to Grow and San Antonio Methodist. So if you would like to be involved in this as we're building out our training program for our per patient tech specialists, or we're building our volunteer network. So our volunteer network, we've had volunteers reach out to us over the last decade saying, oh my gosh, what you all do is amazing. I am a game master with 20, 30, 40 years of experience, and I want to pay it forward and help some kids. We haven't had a place to place them, even though they might be fantastic potential volunteers to run tabletop role-playing game groups. Now, once we build this system out, we can actually give them an access to make the world a better place using their hobbies, and also support some kids and getting some play, but not just play, but interactional social play. So if you would like to be involved in this, go to gametogrow.org/hospital. I'm basically building this. So if you have some ideas you want to share with us, what you would think would make this program better, I want to have you involved. Let's make a big table. We can all play, and we can all make this thing happen.
Yeah. And I don't know, I know we started a little late. I don't know what our question time is, but there is one question that I saw Lou put up here that I think is worth touching on really quickly. Well, there's a bunch, but the stories are not targeted toward treatment plan in any way. Because of the nature of the way this is a special event, it is almost impossible to know if if any given patient will be in the game. Even if they say yes, even if they're still here, they might have gotten a procedure, something that would have made them really tired. They might just be having a bad day. So the stories are kid-friendly. They're sanitized. We're fighting mashed potato monsters. We're not fighting goblins and all kinds of like genuine horrible beasties or anything like that. But there's no specific targeting toward treatment plan. Just in that respect. And it's the same reason why the stories are sort of prepped. They go through at least me as a patient tech, but everything is sanitized down to a very kid-friendly level, which is fun when we have an 18-year-old and a 8 or 9-year-old in the same game, and the 18-year-old is like, okay, but I want to investigate the geopolitical nature of this, and the 8-year-old is like, I want to hit something.
In that particular storyline, there was this famous chef who was sort of a Gordon Ramsay type character, who was stolen by carrots that had come to life, and the carrots, doing what carrots do, buried him in the ground with just his head sticking up out of the ground, because they're carrots and they did what they thought was best. And then the players basically have to go through the garden where the carrots are grabbing at their feet and trying to bury them as well, and then they fight carrots and sort of use their cool character special abilities to defeat carrots and then pull him out of the ground. And then when they get back over to the actual chef's room, they see that this magic spoon sent there by the evil wizard Malvex has been used to stir some mashed potatoes, and then they fight this giant mashed potato golem, which is, there's always Alexander was talking about, when he's played a character, he's been consumed by the mashed potato monster and then spit out across the room, and the players really enjoy the sort of cartoon whimsy of that moment.
Let's see if there's any other questions, and if we have time for them. I know, Chris, you're on moderation, but since we started late, I don't know what that timeline looks like.
So yeah, you guys, this is Chris. You guys got a couple of minutes. We could field a couple more questions if people have more questions in the chat, for sure.
In the chat, raises hands, all kinds of stuff like that.
Just out of curiosity, this is Chris again. I want to know what, you shared a couple of great stories. Oh, well, let's get to this question first. Go ahead and answer that. And then if we have time, I'll ask my question. So
Marty, with the progress and reflection of what you're doing, how do you see this partnership growing? As well as how do we handle long-term player regularity? Well, for growth, we're back to the potential slide. We really want to see this. We want to have this as a regular thing. That's one of the things we learned, is that regular times work really well with a hospital where we can be like, yes, every Thursday, like the child life team is way more comfortable giving me patients, things like that. And so obviously we're still experimenting with what game systems and trying to dial in exactly what it works. But long-term growth, we want to see large-scale volunteer network run by Game to Grow, helping like support not just us, but as many hospitals as we can manage, or staff-run games if people have the staffing hours for it.
I am sometimes accused of grandiose thinking, but this is sort of a part of Game to Grow's mission from the get-go, is sort of like the Microsoft model around, when they were building computers in their garages, their vision, their mantra was, a computer on every desk. And my vision for this, hold me back, is a game in every hospital. I want volunteer networks running these games. We've seen the benefits in just this small pilot program. I want every hospital in the country, hold me back, the world, to be able to provide this kind of service for their kids.
And then for Abe, we haven't hammered down long-term character development, in part because we're changing systems, but in part we don't have that many repeat players. Just the nature of my hospital being about a 96-bed hospital, and we don't have we have our hematology oncology BMT unit, and that's about our only long-term unit or repeat unit. So we haven't hammered down what that looks like, though we have talked about armbands or some kind of totem that they can show to be like, I am a ninth, I am a green armband.
I mean, ultimately, there's real benefit to being able to play the same character over time. And in the Game to Grow model, as we use it for socialization outside of a hospital setting, continued experience and continued contact with your character and being able to sort of reciprocally grow through your character is a big part of the process. And that was one of the learnings there too, is in the course of 90 minutes, you want some story progress, but it's hard to have meaningful character growth and meaningful character progress in that 90-minute session. So that's one of those things that makes this unique. These are almost all one shots. When someone does a one shot, meaning a single episode that doesn't necessarily connect to other episodes. So that is something that we would continue to work and really on a case by case basis with the hospital and with the youth, as someone in Alexander's position would know the youth pretty well. Would understand what would cultivate their enthusiasm for this. Would that be continued access, continued character growth, or not? Some players might want to choose a different character because last time they smashed things, and this time they want to use magic lightning spells or something like that. So we want to make that on more of a case by case basis, sort of ad hoc.
Hey guys, this is Chris. I'll jump in really fast. In our last minute or so, I see some great questions in the chat about CCTV and stuff like that. But there's two, I think, maybe practical questions that could be answered pretty quickly that I for sure want to know about, which is cost and experience. So what does a program like this cost, I guess, from a material standpoint, because obviously staff and infrastructure is a thing. But assuming that people have staff to handle something awesome like this, what does it cost, and then what kind of experience does somebody need to start it up? And then we'll wrap this session.
You want to hit cost, Alexander?
I was going to let you hit cost, actually.
I mean, the costs are actually pretty minimal. So depending on the game, there are dice involved, and a set of dice. I have a set because I'm a game master who runs games a lot. They're handy. There's a set of dice is about $6. It's not a lot. Dice can also be cleaned and sanitized between if they're not given away as a gift. So a $5 or $6, and we can probably get those donated, is the main material cost for that. There's some printing. Game to Grow has game systems. We could provide. We provide Critical Core, obviously, for free to lots of agencies and clinics. And as we transition what games are necessary, the hospital probably doesn't need to invest in really any of those things. If Game to Grow is staffing with our volunteers those events, if the hospital wants to do that, you can get PDF copies of a lot of these games for pretty cheap, and then it's a printing cost for printing out the character sheets. Pretty minimal.
And then hospital tech, we use iPads. You're going to need something. iPads are probably going to be what you're going to need, just for supporting that conversational stuff. Because relying on patient devices is a terrible plan. Having done that before, it just is a bad idea. And then the other bit of that was experience. So I would honestly, I think this is something you need to be, if not a fairly experienced DM, one who comes from a well-trained background, because this is very challenging to keep within a 90-minute time window. I've been running games for a decade-ish, and I can't do a 90-minute time window. I am verbose and will wander and ramble. So in that respect, there is a specific type of like DMing that you need to do, and it's very different than the DMing with your friends at home.
So to build on that, Game to Grow's training program, when we trained therapeutic game masters, it's 18 hours of training split off into multiple days, followed by 10 weeks of consultation. We have a shadowing process. It's a complicated series of steps to become a truly qualified and skilled game master in this kind of context. We're building a modification to our training program because this is not, as we talked about earlier, outcome dependent. We're not building treatment plans into the game. It's more about the disposition and the capacity that the game master has to respond to emerging issues. And so we're assuming it's the process for training individuals for this would be similar to what we do in-house with Game to Grow, where we actually shadow. And so Game to Grow then steps in as we would run games or have our staff run games while the patient tech specialist would observe, and then we would reverse shadow and then have the patient tech specialist run games while Game to Grow provides that sort of ongoing support.
That's awesome, guys. Alexander and Adam, thank you for your session. So much more to learn from you guys, too. Are you going to be able to hang out in Gather Town later on during breaks today?
I will be.
I have meetings through so much of the day today, as is the working from home life, but I will do my best to be there.
Sweet.
I'll be around.
Thanks, guys. All right. Appreciate it.